But I know what. Hey, oh, if there's ever time to get more listings, I don't know how this slide got in here. I don't know. but I can't do it anymore because May is over. So, like, never get told. All right, let me jump in here. Oh, let's figure it out. And I gotta do this, that, and that's so. All right, next up on our agenda, again, thanks so much, Gideon. Super appreciate you being here. And just kind of segues into our conversation today about property disclosures. We are going to talk a little bit about radon and get some clarity around how a lot of this stuff works. And we talking about this the other day on our leadership team for Illinois with other managing brokers, and you know, we were talking about some of the challenges and issues around the real property disclosure report, and we realized, hey, it's the 1-year anniversary of the new real property disclosure report in the state of Illinois. So, yay, congratulations, happy anniversary to the new form. And hopefully, I'm assuming all of you have been using this and providing it to your sellers. So, but you know, oftentimes there are questions around it, and if you don't have it, you can jump into SkySlope because they're formatted in there. And shameless plug, we'll talk about that today at 10 a.m. But just a reminder, you know, this is a great resource, which is the, you know, frequently asked questions that were provided by the Illinois Association of Realtors at the time that this new property disclosure was rolled out. And I'll share this in the chat box. And we're going to talk about a couple of the issues that are on this FAQ, and primarily we're talking around the fact that, you know, what are the big changes on it? And one of the big changes was question number 1. Hey, has the seller occupied the property? And oftentimes the question always comes into, you know, this is the old version, you know, question number 1, has the seller occupied the property within the last 12 months? No explanation is needed. Well, the updated version now requires that there's an explanation. And so, you know, there's been some confusion on what the implications are if the seller checks off no. Does that mean that they're exempt? Well, no, it doesn't, obviously. And it's important for you as an agent, protect your client by giving them advice, right? And same thing with, you know, both sides. If you're representing a seller or you're representing a buyer, but I'll share it for you. In that FAQ is provided by the Illinois Association of Realtors, when they specifically are talking about question number 1, you know, question number 1, the seller answers whether they've occupied the property in the last 12 months. If no, seller must identify the capacity or explain seller's relationship to the property. It is worth adding that when the answer was then or is now no, seller has a duty to answer the remaining questions to the best of the seller's actual knowledge. And oftentimes we are getting confused as agents thinking, oh, if the seller checks off no, it means they don't need to fill the form out, or it means they can just put NA, 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 NA all across up and down the entire form. That's not correct, right? So who is exempt from the real property disclosure? And if you look on the new real property disclosure in section 15, it really lays it out specifically. But, you know, Steve, that's really small and the fine print, and I don't want to read that. Can you just help us through? Explain to me how this all works. So, talk about that. So the question is, who is exempt from the real property disclosure? And it's not as many as you think. Number 1, this is apparent, bank-owned foreclosures. You know, if a bank has foreclosed on the property and it's being sold either at auction or being sold to the MLS through an REO agent, the bank does not need to provide the real property disclosure. Okay, they're exempt because they have never occupied the property, and don't know anything about it. And so for those of you that are working with buyers, you're aware of the fact that you're not going to have that. It's not going to be provided to you, and that's okay, right? On the bank-owned foreclosures. One entity that's exempt. Second entities that are exempt are estates or probate. When the property is in probate, it's being foreclosed on. Excuse me, it's in probate or it's in an estate. And the heirs have no knowledge. In cases they probably do, but in many they don't. So probate properties that are in estates right now, the process of being sold through an estate or through probate are generally are exempt now. So, who next are exempt from real property disclosure? New construction that has never been occupied. New construction that has never been occupied. So builders are exempt. Obviously, in the situation where it's a brand new construction, it's highly unlikely that there's anything wrong with it. In many cases, yeah, you don't need one. In a lot of cases, a new construction, oftentimes you're getting a home warranty anyway, and which resolves a lot of those issues. So question in the chat box, if a transaction fails to disclose issues, the banks need to disclose to the next buyer. Oh, that's a really good question. And again, they don't. Bank-owned foreclosures, these entities, these big companies selling these properties don't need to disclose. They're exempt from it. However, if during the course of that transaction, the listing agent has been advised or has seen written evidence of issues, challenges with that property, the expectation in our rules in the state of Illinois, real estate agents is our obligation is still to disclose. So does the bank still fill the form out? No, and they have no medium or system or tool in order to disclose those issues. But the listing agent, again, case for any agent, you discover something through the course of your listing a property or buying a property, you need to disclose. This is why I always tell listing agents to never, ever, ever, ever look at the buyer's home inspection report. Deal cancels, and you have to disclose everything on that home inspection that you've seen, down to rusty bolt on antenna on roof. So that's a great question, Amy. Very good. All right. That's it. Those are the only 3 entities that are exempt. From the chat, if a listing agent REO sees something where they fill the property, no, agents never, ever, never fill out disclosure reports. Obviously, that's a big, can't ever do that. They do need to disclose it in various other fashions, whether it's verbally or in an email, or it could be in the private remarks in the MLS, which obviously it's going to be rare to see. But if there's something major, that's a latent defect, no one's seen, and now the listing agent is aware of it, should be telling the buyer's agent either via email or on the phone, verbally, that there's that ongoing issue. Only the actual physical owner needs to fill the form out. An agent should never fill out the real property disclosure form. That puts the liability in your pocket. All right, so those are the only people that are exempt. The only people that are exempt. All right, so who is not exempt? Who is not exempt from the real property disclosure? And this is really important. You need to educate your seller clients accordingly. And also, if you represent a buyer, be aware of these issues and make sure you're protecting your client and getting the disclosures correctly filled out, right? So who is not exempt? Flippers and rehabbers. Even if they bought it as an REO, even if they bought it as an auction property, the moment that flipper or rehabber takes ownership of that property, close. Now they are the actual owner. They're not that institution anymore. They're not an estate, not a builder. Flippers and rehabbers are not exempt. Who else is not exempt? Investors or landlords. Again, if the property's never been occupied, I've never lived there, I don't need to disclose. That's not true. I don't need to fill this form out, and I can just put an A all across the board because I've never occupied the property. That's not correct. The landlord or investor owner probably is aware of issues. They're the ones that have had to pay for the maintenance. They're the ones that had to pay to fix the leaky roof. So their obligation is still there too. All right, an as-is sale. We do see this sometimes where the seller thinks, well, I'm just selling it as is, so I don't need to fill this form out. Obligated to fill it out. Who else? So a seller inherited the property. If your seller's inherited the property and probate is done, the property is now in that seller's name alone. They've inherited it, taken ownership of it. Okay, they're not exempt. It's not in an estate anymore. After probate is done and they've taken ownership of the property, now they need to complete property disclosure, whether it's 1 month or 1 year or 1 day after they've taken possession of that property and title has been transferred to their name. So they do need to disclose and fill the form out. We see this a lot too. I've never occupied it. I've never set foot in the property. It's an investment property. I live in Arizona. I've never been there. I've never seen it. Doesn't exempt your seller from filling out that report. Who else? Wholesalers. Wholesalers, quite honestly, are required to present and forward that private. Wholesalers, again, those individuals that are middlemen or have assignments to the property, they are still required to take that property disclosure report from the owner of record, the owner on title, and then present that or provide that over to the end buyer. Who else? They've purchased an auction or tax sale. Again, same situation. The moment an individual takes possession of that property, they're obligated to complete the form. This is a good one. This recently came up. I'm not kidding. The buyer doesn't want one. The buyer doesn't want one. And it's not a joke. You know, we had a transaction where the buyer was an investor. Like, I don't care. I don't want it. And so we got through the process to where then the seller and the listing agent all felt, well, then we don't need to do it. We don't need to provide it. And that's not correct. It does need to be provided. And there, oftentimes too, it's there to protect not just the buyer or the seller, but it's also there to protect you as the agent, to protect you as the company. Buyer says they don't want one now, but 6 months down the road, decide to come back and sue you or us or the listing agent or anyone else or the buyer's agent because there's a defect that wasn't disclosed. Fall back on the concept like, wow, they didn't want one to begin with. This is an interesting one. For sale by owners. FSBOs are not exempt, right? They think they may be. They think I don't need to do all this paperwork. That's why I'm selling it on my own. But state of Illinois' laws, as it relates to disclosure, isn't just for real estate agents, right? It's the disclosure relates to any individual that's selling their home. So I know it puts buyer's agents in a tough situation if you're representing a buyer who's coming in to put an offer on a property and there's no disclosures. You need to help them facilitate that. And then trusts and corporations. Again, trusts and corporations, not specifically as it relates to banks that have foreclosed on a property, but they're vetting trusts and corporations. And they keep saying, I checked number 1. It says I never occupied it. I don't need to fill this out. So, all right, radon disclosures. Interesting. Who's exempt from radon? In the interest of time, I'll jump through this. Bank home foreclosures are exempt. Same thing. Estates and probate still exempt. Rentals. Rentals are exempt from radon disclosures unless the owner is aware that there's the presence of radon. And here's an interesting one that you maybe didn't know. Builders are not exempt from radon. Builders are not exempt from radon for various reasons, but in the building code in the state of Illinois, they're not exempt from radon. Look, the foundation could have been poured several months or years before the property is ever fully built. Radon could be present underneath that slab. Been there for 6 months, 2 years, 3 years, who knows how long it's been sitting there. Many of the builder contracts address radon, which means they don't necessarily need to provide that specific form. But builders are not exempt from radon. So, yeah. All right, lead-based paint disclosure. Who's exempt from lead-based paint disclosures? Who knows? Put it in the chat box. Does anyone know who is exempt from lead-based disclosure? Exempt. Ooh. Exempt from David. Houses built after 1978. Yes, this is true. This is true. That is true. I left that part out. Jennifer McLeland has the correct answer. No one, if the property was built before 1978, yes. No one is exempt. This is federal law. Lead-based disclosure is a federal law. And so it's important that you're educating your clients again on the correct process. And as we mentioned, section 35, there in the FAQs that I shared before, seller has the duty to answer remaining questions to the best of the seller's actual knowledge, whether they've occupied the property or not. Question in the chat, are condos higher than second floor exempt from random disclosure? Yes, that is true as well. Okay, I shared those in there. We're talking about the sky slope forms class immediately following this session. We're going to talk about how to pull those forms in and template the real property disclosure into SkySlope so you can send it to your client. Hang out today.